Welcome to the second podcast of Oneness Radio. And I'm here with my buddy Ev.
Hey.
And today, it's only our second podcast, but we have a guest joining us, my buddy Sunny D, or D, as we'll call him for the interview. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, boys.
Yeah, no worries.
All right. So it won't be a guest format in that we're going to be interviewing you, buddy. But if you have anything to say, feel free to speak up.
Great.
And
I brought my resume and my CV.
That's it. And me and my boy Ev will just do what we do. So our last podcast was about mindfulness. Right? Do you remember anything that we brought up in there, or is there anything that you have to kick us off here, Ev?
Yeah, so what I really loved about that first podcast was that we had no idea about what we were going to talk about. And then sort of it morphed into a talk on mindfulness, which we really sort of fleshed out by the end of the podcast, which was really, really good. And what I found was that throughout the last week since we recorded, I was really looking into, all right, well, what we talked about and how am I sort of implementing that into my everyday experience, which is, I think, the most important thing about spirituality is not just to sort of learn what people say and do and whatnot, but you actually implementing it in some sort of way into your life.
Yeah, implementing the mindfulness into our lives, that's a huge thing, right? And I think anyone on any kind of spiritual path, that's what they try to do, right? Whether suppose I'm a Buddhist trying to be mindful, or a Christian trying to keep my mind on God and Jesus, or a Muslim trying to keep my mind in submission in Islam to God, or whatever it is trying to keep your mind on what it should be, and therefore alleviating some of the pressures by letting it, but that kind of arise when we let it focus on other things. So just as a stress reliever, right? Mindfulness is a great tool, And so D, why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on mindfulness or any experiences you had?
Well, it's not so random that you ask about this, but I just had this conversation yesterday with someone just about being mindful about just your words even. Every year around New Year's, I always have my resolutions like many other people do that usually center around me losing a few pounds over the holidays. But this time around, I thought about something that's a little bit more internal. As being, I'm a father. I have some kids, and and I really thought about being more mindful of like the words that I use, or even using like these filters. I've seen this meme, like, is it necessary? Is it out of love? Is it out of hate? Keeping these things to be mindful of the words that come out of your mouth, and how I project myself around my kids, how I see them, how they interact with other people. And, it really cuts deep sometimes when I think about the words that come out of my mouth, and it's like a little bit of diarrhea. But, mindfulness for me, like recently, has cut really deep and has come home to me, which hasn't in the past. I haven't really thought about thinking of my words. They usually come out pretty, quickly and freely. Up until about 3 years ago, maybe this is a good kickoff. I had the gift to be quiet. Not that I was a big mouth or ego-driven, which, of course I am, but I had the freedom to kind of keep silent for a moment, to think more inwards, to calm myself and, be quiet. But I found that it's also been not a curse, but, it's been difficult to articulate, while being quiet. I stay quiet for so long that, I sometimes have felt like, maybe my words aren't necessary. Maybe it's not time for me to speak. Which, when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about these things. Is it necessary? Is it out of love? What is it going to do to somebody else? As a father and, just a person, I think about those things a little bit more. So it's a little bit true to me now. What do you think, K-Man?
No, I totally agree with everything you're saying, and how, for me, what resonated there is your motivation, right? So your motivation for why you're becoming more mindful is love of your children, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, like mindfulness, spirituality, all these things, there's two pillars to it for me. One is the mental aspect, which is the mindfulness, the meditation, the emptying, the, whatever you want to call it. There's mantras, there's all kinds of different things you can do as a mental exercise, right? And this is to just calm the mind, right? And relax the mind, things like that. The other half of that is the inspiration. And this is where the love comes in, right? The love, the oneness with everything, all those things, right? And I think keeping yourself motivated, and then to practice, and then the practice itself work hand in hand. And the motivation of love for your children to become more mindful is great, right? Because it's almost like you're taking love and you're doing something constructive with it, right? And it's just an expression of love. I like that you brought up that motivation in there as well. Ev, what do you gotta say on that?
Yeah, well, that hit home as well, because I have a daughter and she's 4 now, and quite often having young children, it can be very frustrating at times, as most people would probably know, and how sometimes you get carried away by that frustration, and sort of like anytime you do get carried away by frustration or anger, you sort of act out of unconsciousness, right? Repetitive habits that you've built up over time, right? And so recognizing that and sort of trying to change that behavior, I guess, is the essence of mindfulness. So realizing that what I've just done there is not necessarily the best way to have sort of dealt with that behavior. And I found that for me, the best way to sort of deal with these situations is really to take a step back, take some breaths, and really open myself up to the possible solution to the behavior that I'm trying to mitigate, I guess, right? Or to correct, let's say. And so this is, an ongoing battle. But of course, your children become great teachers. You know what I mean? It really shows you, they can really show you where those deep-seated tendencies lie, and give you the opportunity to practice it, which is amazing. And but I have found recently that, like, if I'm snapping at my daughter or even my wife or something, right, that even that is a trigger to be like, oh, all right, hold on a sec. Let's take a step back. There's definitely another way to deal with this. And if I give it the space, the solution will arise naturally. And it's hard to, like most things, like people go into situations with preconceived ideas of how best to deal with a specific situation. And those ideas may, for the most part, work, but it will never work 100% of the time. The universe just isn't like that. So the more open you are, the more likely you will respond to that situation in the right way, whatever that happens to be. So that's really what I endeavor to do while raising my child, because if I look at the way that I was raised, it was completely different, right? Like where it was just full unconsciousness, and my parents, they just had no idea, and that's fine. That's just who they were, right? But now that I recognize that, how can I create an environment for my child to grow up in that's safe and loving, and they can open themselves up and express themselves as naturally as possible without fearing consequence. You know what I mean? But also within the constraints of modern society where they act like a good human being. So trying to find that balance is quite challenging, but mindfulness is a great way to help find that balance.
Okay. Yeah, I really get that. I will make the point though that, and this is where the I don't know what to call it besides spirituality or the unknown to us, right? The unknown factor here that we're dancing around, trying to articulate, trying to in some way become more in tune with, is that despite all the unconsciousness that you were raised with, that I was raised with, right? Here we sit.
Yes, exactly.
So you could say that your parents did a perfect job of raising a mindful child.
Yeah.
Right? With all the things we've gone through and the things that we think our parents should have done differently and things like that. Those were the things that motivated you to be the person you are today. And now you're sitting here. So this truly points out this whole thing of mindfulness, in the fact that mindfulness is also a putting the brakes on trying to figure out and understand, and just kind of sitting back and letting things be in and of themselves and being comfortable there to the point where no harm is being done that you're conscious of. So there is the possibility that, you do your best to raise your children in an environment of mindfulness and awareness and meditation, all these things. And they could turn out to be what's relatively considered a terrible person. And on the flip side, you could have someone growing up in a terrible environment. And we know there's tons of stories of this, right? And yet they end up being an incredible person, relatively speaking. So, kind of it's really, I find, the tools that I was equipped with that helped me the most. So as I was growing up, my environment was my environment, and you have very little control as a child, right? But as I was growing up, I was lucky enough to be taught by my parents or by other people I met in life to give me tools with which to process what was happening to me, different angles. And that let me kind of like process everything in a self-analytical way. I knew how to look at myself and say, wait a minute, what's going on here, right? You become self-analytical or self-aware, so to speak, and more contemplative as opposed to just acting with whatever's arising. And I was given those tools at a young age, luckily for me. And I think I was, and still am far from perfect. And I've been through many phases of relatively good and relatively bad throughout my life. But having those self-analytical tools is what brought me to the point where we're sitting here. Right? So, just to all the parents out there is, do your best, right? But understand that there's more factors than just you at play when it comes to how your child will turn out. So you do your best and you give your child 100% and you be the best you can be, as an example. And don't forget that an important thing you can do as a parent is be someone who's ready to be kind of like an older brother type friend when the time arises for your child as well. There comes a time where the nurturing part, you kind of have to back off, and then you become like a friend in that child's life. And that transition is tough for a lot of parents. And, when your children are children, of course, but as they grow up, once they hit their late teens and stuff is when that transition starts to happen, is that at that point too, right? That's when you can also really be effective. Like parenting, people kind of like sometimes, from what I've seen, give up on parenting once they're teenagers and say, okay, well, they're doing their thing now, whatever. But there's an aspect of parenting you can be is that confidant, that friend, right? That true and genuine friend to your child as they grow up. And the way to keep this open with your child at sometimes could be not to judge them so much as they're getting older. So that they will come to you with more things because they're not afraid of judgment. If you're the person that can, okay, let's sit back and, like you were saying before, there's another way we can deal with this, right? I find that if you're more accessible to your child as opposed to a judge, it could, keep that channel of communication open. And that's what I think is most important going throughout life. If you want to be a positive influence in your child's life, not just when they're children, but as teenagers, as young adults, and beyond, right? Because hopefully one day they might be able to teach you something. Just like, I'm sure you've been able to go back and teach your parents something. So yeah, that was my 2 cents. I don't have kids, but from the outside looking in, always easier said than done, but that's the 2 cents from the guy that doesn't have kids. How does that resonate, or does it at all?
I think it does. I mean, if you would have asked me this maybe, 8 years ago when my son was, just a couple years old, or, then maybe I would have thought a little bit differently, but, through the filter of a few years, it does resonate what you say. I tend to sometimes do the things that I do, not out of love, but sometimes out of fear, out of the way that maybe I grew up and how maybe, my parents dealt with things, or the situations that we ended up in, which weren't always the greatest, and I love my mom. But, there's things that my brother and I, we both said, oh, we'll never do that. We'll never do that. We'll never let our kids go through, not having electricity, or not having, having our phone turned off, or having our car repossessed. Those are things that, growing up kind of really sucked. But, I keep saying those things even to this day, like, yeah, I'll never let that happen to my kids. I'll never let that happen to my family. But, those things could always happen. You never know what life could deal you. But it does ring true, like how you deal with things, and how we know that it's helped hone who we are today. Yes, I grew up in the kind of sometimes dire situations that weren't always great, but here I am. We're talking about mindfulness and, how we want to do things more out of love, and reversing the things that we did out of fear. So as a father, and a husband, it really rings true that, at some point, even now, I have to start, traversing parenthood and what we do, and learning to become a friend, to my children, so that they can, sometimes I tell my son, no, you can do it on your own. You can do it. And I'm doing that out of love. I'm not doing it to be hateful, or make him just do it himself. But, sometimes that's out of love too. But, it rings true. I do want my kids to come to me, and not fear me, or fear that I'll judge them, So I kind of yearn for those days to come. So, thanks for that. That's good parting words. Thanks.
Well, I think, sometimes children might mistake your expression of love as an expression of fear, right? So what happens is, like you're saying, like, I'd never let that happen to my kids, or whatever, right? So I remember growing up, my mom was like, she used to watch a lot of after-school specials and stuff, right? And so she would always make sure when we come home, she's like, did anyone touch you in an inappropriate place, and da-da-da-da-da, And it's like, because after-school special said, always talk to your kids about that stuff, right? And for me, it just became really awkward, because I'd come home and I'd have to, explain to my mom that no one molested me today. And I'd have to have that conversation with my mother all the time, right?
It was a good day.
Not to make light of the situation that it did, but you understand how she's acting out of love, but it also made me really conscious of, like, people molesting people, because it was brought up every day, right? And I was like, man. And so you start to look around and mistrust people as a child, right? And you see things where, sometimes they're not there, right? Because that's what she's making me focus on. But she's trying to make sure that if anything ever happened, that I'd speak up. That's what she's trying to do, right? she's also trying to make sure that if there's any situation in which I think things are suspicious, that I get myself out of it. That's what she's trying to do, right? But how it got expressed was, come home every day and explain to me in a way that I can believe, so that you're not hiding anything, that you weren't molested or abused in some way, right? And it's because a child is like your heart outside in the world that you can't protect. It's like your beating heart is walking around outside, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's basically out there in the world, right? At the mercy of the world. And, when that beating heart comes back to you at the end of your work day or whatever, you want to bring it in and bring it right back into security, right? And make sure everything's okay with it, right? And so that's what I mean by, it was love that it came from, right? But it was expressed as fear and anxiety. And so ends up having other effects, right? As I get older now, I can understand, she was just trying to look out for us and all those things. But from the perspective of a child who doesn't have that experience, right? I think the communication of that love can be garbled sometimes because they're not seeing it through an adult's goggles, right?
You're completely right about both aspects there, about from the child's perspective and the parent's perspective. And what I find interesting is that, as a parent and dealing with your children in an open way, should we, I guess, approach all relationships in the same way? Not just from, parent to child, but to all relationships, to have an open, accepting relationship with all people.
No judgment.
Yeah.
No judgment.
Yeah.
I actually had said this to a bunch of people the other day. I'm like, when a child comes up to me and goes, "Bah, I don't like you," or, whatever, says something strange to you, like, whatever, it's just a kid, right? And we don't give adults that same leeway, right? That, they're just going through their emotions, or, they just need to grow up a little bit, right? There comes a point where we just don't give people the leeway that we give children, and we kind of harden our hearts towards non-children, put it that way. There's a certain compassion, a general nurturing compassion that's natural within every species towards children, so to speak, right? The young, to care for the young. From almost a self-preservation continuation of the species, something in our DNA. But there comes a certain age where we stop giving people leeway, and we say, they should know better, right? And the question is who's decided that they should know better? And at what age should you know better? And how is it that one should just know better? Right? Like, who sits down and tells you the rules of, this is the things you should know better? Right? We kind of all generally come around to it, some of us later than others at different points in life. So when I was talking about this, I was saying, look at the child in you. There's some parts of you that are very adult, and there's some parts of you that are very childish, right? And a great way to bring to the surface the part of you that needs to grow up, so to speak, and become more mature and developed is when you're under pressure. So whenever you're under pressure and you want to deal with it, your more childish aspects might come to the surface, right? So some people they're having a bad day. They'll go home and they'll, eat a whole pizza or a whole cake to themselves, right? Or some people will go home and drink too much. Or some people go home and abuse their family, verbally or physically, right? Some people will go home and look to substance abuse or drugs. Some people will go home and veg out in front of the TV for 8 hours longer than they should, or whatever. You know what I mean? There's always a way to deal with or to soothe oneself when they're in a stressful situation. And so I find that that's the part of oneself that needs to grow up, that you need to nurture, that you need to parent. So to bring the topic more towards the internal aspects of what's happening now, where are the children in you? Where's your children, inner children, that haven't been nurtured enough, or haven't been taught enough, or given enough attention, so that part of you has never been able to grow into maturity, into adulthood, into a fully functioning and developed part of yourself, right? And so mindfulness is a great way to kind of pay attention to these aspects, because this is just from personal experience. So take from it what you will, but you may realize that the parts of you that need to grow up inside yourself are the parts that you don't want your children to see in you. Those are the parts you're trying to restrain and be mindful of so that they don't affect your child negatively. These are the parts in you that also need to grow up. So you're trying to hide your inner child or childishness and childish aspects from your own children. Because the rest of it is balanced. It's functional. You can deal with it. It's like, okay, we can do this, this, and this, right? So there's that aspect of it too. If that's applicable or it helps anyone out there, is that look inside to your own childish aspects, and you'll know them, because it's when you're under pressure that they're the first things you want to grab onto. You almost want to revert to a childlike stage when things get too much as an adult. So you find those places inside yourself and give them love and attention in the times when you're not under pressure, and let them grow naturally. Give them some light, give them some nurturing. Say, you know what, maybe I will look into my drinking problem this year. Maybe I will look into my overeating problem, or my drug problem, or my verbal abuse problem, whatever it is, my anger management. That needs some nurturing. You can't just say, oh, that's me. I just get too angry sometimes. And, there's something there that can grow, right? Like growing doesn't have to stop. Just like it's like a two-way street. So you stop giving people leeway at a certain age, saying you should know better. And at the same time, you stop giving yourself room to grow at a certain age, because you're saying, well, I should know now. I'm an adult, or, there's nothing left for me here, right? The growing process should be, like you're saying, an ongoing battle. It can continue. Surprise yourself with what you can do. Surprise yourself with how much you can grow inside, right? But at a certain age, we stop focusing on inner growth and the growth of the person. And we say, now you got to go out in the world and do things. You have to grow things yourself, as opposed to growing on your own, right? Instead of growing yourself, you have to grow other things. And I think that transition leaves a lot of people undeveloped and just thrown out into the world, so to speak, with no textbook or support on how to keep growing as an individual, as you are now put out into the world and asked to grow things, grow your career, grow your relationships, right? Grow your material possessions, grow your knowledge, right? These are things that, yes, they can grow, but what about you as an emotional creature? This is overlooked. How do all the emotional aspects of yourself also grow along with this to handle this complete turnabout to focusing on outer things, right? Your emotional side is kind of left in the dark.
Yeah, that's really quite good, actually. I like the point that you said, if you're having issues sort of with major or even minor problems that sort of just happen unconsciously, let them arise in times where you're not so emotional about them. And what's interesting is that actually sort of connects directly to how I parent as well. So let's say my daughter's having an episode where she's freaking out about something, right? And she just refuses to listen. So what I find works really well with her is just to let her calm down for a while and then explore the topic with her later. Actually sit her down and talk about, okay, well, why do you think that happened? What were you feeling? And what caused you to do that? In so many words. And you're so right that that's a great way to actually deal with yourself, because often in the moment when things get heated, it's very hard to really sort of see that happening and stop it at the source, which is not impossible, but much, much harder. And it does take time to sort of slow down, reflect, see what's happening, and be honest. That's very important. And really look at the reasoning behind your behavior and address it.
Yeah, Ev, I get it too. I have 2 kids, and I have a 4-year-old girl as well, and I have a 10-year-old boy. And yeah, sometimes I feel like he's going on like 13 or 14 or 15. He's already getting that, getting to his own man self. But yeah, when I feel like I'm bumping heads with my son, I feel like my wife comes in as the voice of reason. Sometimes she goes, just back off, chill out, let him go through what he's going through, and talk about it later. And I thought, oh no, I just have to keep doing it, but in a calmer voice, do it out of love. But it's just me projecting onto him. And I just have to learn, with my kids to sometimes, like what you said, let it get out of their system. But sometimes it's for yourself as well. Being introspective and looking at these things a little bit more clear. It's definitely a good thing. I found even in the past few months, listen to my wife and how she. At first, I thought it wasn't a great idea, but I found it to be a lot more fruitful. Just like what you were saying. And then just stepping back and then talking about it, even with my 4-year-old, so why do you think that happened? So yeah, it rings true. So words of wisdom.
And have you sort of experienced that with yourself, with the internal dialogue of yourself? Have you found instances where you have just taken a step back with the craziness that's happening and be like, okay, and just allowing it to happen, and then I guess diagnosing is probably the best word I can use for that. Have you been able to sort of reconcile some of the inner turmoil that happens with you?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that I think of the past few years. This has been one of the ways that I've been able to stay somewhat sane, is to be able to, push these things out, to the surface as well. For I think a long time, I just kind of keep them bottled up. But, being able to really, sit down with myself, what we say self-love, has been a really good thing. Getting able to push these things out and talk to me, and being quiet, like I said at the very beginning, coming full circle, I've been able to stay quiet for a good reason, and it's be able to think before I say. It's been really valuable for me. It's helped me relax more. I think it's helped me to have a better relationship with people around me. But I kind of divert a little bit. I don't know how you guys grew up, but as a kid, I was kind of a weird kid. I wasn't a cool kid, and I was kind of always on the I was always on the outer edge of everyone's kind of circle. But I always listened, and I was always very quiet, always listening, always kind of watching what everyone else was doing. And I did that everywhere I went, and it served me. It served me well for a long time, even into my early adult years. But I don't know. How did you grow up? Were you a quiet kid? Did you do a lot of things internally? Did you have to help yourself? What was it like for you, Ev? What were you like when you were a kid?
Yeah, I actually discussed it a bit on the previous podcast, but what you're saying is basically my same experience. So, yeah, my childhood was quite troubled. There was a lot of violence in the home. Not to say all the time, but it was, above what is acceptable from today. But I was, compared to my brothers, I was a very deep listener and very, very quiet. I wasn't very forthcoming with how I was feeling. And I ended up sort of dealing with a lot of my emotional troubles on my own. And I think that really sort of set the stage for how I grew up into an adult. Someone who's much more sort of relaxed, easygoing, quite peaceful. And I found that through my teen years and when I was in university and so on, people would naturally, for some reason, come up to me and talk to me about their problems. I wasn't too sure why, but maybe it was because I was just a listener. I didn't really have much to say. And that's a very important aspect of relationships. If you can't listen, how can you have a proper conversation? And that's true with yourself. You know what I mean? Like if you're not listening to the internal dialogue, the strife, and what's happening inside, how can you try and come to terms with and change who you are for the better? Yes? And thus, how can you possibly think that you can help other people if you can't really listen to yourself?
Moving back at a point earlier in the conversation here and talking about children and the self and stuff like that. When you're dealing with, let's say, a child that's crying or screaming or something like that, right? The first thing, especially as males of our species, right? But it also has to do with females of our species as well, is that don't see it as a challenge to your authority. Especially dealing with like male children, and you're a male yourself. I think females with females too go through the same thing, is that it's not a challenge to your authority. A child talking back to you and doing things, because you're looking at things from a certain point of view, you see it as a challenge to your authority. That's like the first layer of it. And so you have to kind of get past that and say this, and they might be testing boundaries, right? But it's not personally direct challenge to your authority. So take that off of the table. That's the first deep breath you have to take, so to speak. Saying, this child isn't coming for me trying to, be top dog around here and establish his dominance. In a sense, it's doing this unconsciously, but what it's really doing is it's testing boundaries, saying, what's acceptable behavior? Because I have no idea. I'm just doing whatever I feel like, and then like reality and parents and adults and other people hedge me in, right? And that's the process of what we call becoming an adult. Once you're all hedged in, so to speak, right? Then you're kind of packaged by the world, right? But when you come into this world, you're just raw awareness, and then you're forced to become an expression. And so you're just a raw expression. And so you'll go through the entire spectrum of expressions. Anger, hate, love, happiness, sadness, depression. You'll try it all because it's all equal to you when you start. Right? You have no reference, an emotion to or an experience to. So you're just trying them all out. And then based on the responses you get, that's how you kind of hedge yourself in to say, well, that's no longer appropriate, or I'm going to do more of that, or I'll do that once in a while, or, you build up all these ways to manage your expression. But at your core, you're just raw expression itself and your raw awareness itself. And so life kind of turns you into a boxed expression, right? And then your awareness gets caught up in the management of that boxed expression and its interaction with other boxed expressions. And this is where mindfulness kind of draws us back from all of that, back to our essence, back to our raw awareness, and the fact that we are just raw expression itself that doesn't have to fit into any form or shape. It's like being pure potential before it's anything else. There's that aspect of yourself too. And so you see, mindfulness requires you to sit in that part of yourself. Mindfulness requires you to remember that part of yourself, to see everything from a calm, even perspective. Because you could say, the less invested you are in the situation on an emotional and I got to get something out of it, or I've got to avoid something in it, in a situation, the more clearly you're able to see it. And so when we're expressing, or we're applying this to dealing with other people, but also dealing with yourself, right? It's a sitting back from yourself. It's a sitting back within yourself and kind of just saying, there's you, and then there's all the thoughts and expressions and feelings you have that are happening inside yourself, on the mental side of yourself. But those things are also expressions. You're before those things. You're kind of like raw ability to express itself. So even before I say a word, where does the word come from? Where do my words come from before they're words? People might say thoughts. Okay, well, where do my thoughts come from before they're thoughts? People might say feelings. Okay, then where do my feelings come from before they're feelings? And what are we left with, right? You're left with a kind of like a silence or a stillness. Mm. You're left with an I don't know, a je ne sais quoi, right? But that's it right there, right? And to be comfortable there and to say, I'm comfortable just being the essence of what I am. I'm comfortable just being, with no rhyme or reason to it, with no need to become anything, with no need to set myself up into a certain form. Take time out of your day and just be that, what you are before any expression. Because everything in your life, your clothes, your body to some point, what you eat, what you say, what you think, what you feel, these are expressions that you're capable of. But who are the you that's capable of all this expression? So to take time out of your day and come back to this point in yourself is once again meditation. And then mindfulness is the continuation of this meditation when you get up and walk around your life. And you'll see how this gives you space in your life. So it's not like things are going to change. It's not like what's going to happen will change overnight, but your relationship with what's happening is now much more manageable. And so now we can apply this to interactions with other beings, with our children, with our family, with our friends, with our co-workers. Already just sitting here, imagining yourself in such a space as you move through your day, but still being fully available for everyone, you already feel like, yeah, that'd be awesome to, you can feel it within yourself, right? I don't know if that's true. I could be just, speaking into space and no one's getting it, but if this is resonating with you, it's resonating because there's something in you that knows, yeah, that would be a great way to go through a day. Now, there's also a part of you saying, well, that's impossible because of this, this, and this, right? But when that voice arises, I would say, bring your mindfulness to that voice. And to go back to the point of your motivation, right? Because you give children leeway because you love them. You don't give strangers as much leeway as your family. You don't give your family as much leeway as your children because there's a hierarchy of love happening within you. And to those you love most, you give the most leeway. So back to the motivation part of this spirituality that we're speaking about is that you must find a way to motivate yourself, or you must find a way to love everyone just as much. And that will take care of the motivation now to be mindful with everyone just as much. To be nurturing with everyone just as much. To care for everyone just as much as you would your own children. And I would propose that it starts with loving yourself that way first. And letting that radiate out. Many people try to move into a shape of, I'm going to love everybody. And they can only maintain it for so long before they crack or they go, screw this. And, it's not worth it. I'm not getting anything back from it or whatever, right? It disheartens people sometimes. But I would propose that if you would learn to love yourself and be mindful with yourself, to learn to be mindful with your own thoughts and say, okay, I see you anger. I see you frustration. It's all good. I'm going to be mindful with you. In one sense, you're nurturing that part of yourself so it can grow up and be fully developed. You're also putting yourself back together again so you're not so in such opposition within your own self, within your mind. So you're bringing more unity in there. And then what that does is when you're speaking to other people, it's not one aspect of yourself or another speaking. It's not anger speaking, or it's not the you that went through a bad childhood speaking. It's the mindful you, right? It's the you who can see the one who had the messed up childhood and can see the one who is sometimes too angry and can see the one who has whatever flaw you want to bring up. But stays aware of all these things and is not caught up in any one of them, but sees the whole of yourself, the good and the bad all at once. The one that sits back before any expression that you've ever done or ever will do, but sees each of these expressions and experiences each of these expressions as itself. But it in and of itself, without these expressions, is just is. And so mindfulness is a way of moving back into this place within yourself and then remaining in this place when you're dealing with others so that you are fully available. It's not like these things disappear, but you're in like the chair, you could say, that can see all these things. You're in the chair that's above all these things as opposed to being down in among those things and then being caught up in them. So to sit down, I would say you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to sit down, be quiet, go into yourself before any expressions, and just sit there and feel at peace, feel whole, and feel love for yourself for just being, before any expressions that you want to blame yourself for or take credit for. Just feel good just being. You owe it to yourself. And there's a certain, I don't know, if you do that enough with yourself and you're good just being more and more, you'll find that you'll have to do less and less in order to fill holes, to fill gaps, right? To avoid parts of yourself that you don't like. You'll put yourself back together again and you'll be more available, and there'll be more of you available to come into play when you're dealing with others. So it's like, do that inner work, I always encourage people to go in and meditate because you owe it to yourself, right? It's your right and it's there for you and it's something you can do, right? No one can stop you from doing that, right? So if you take anything away from what I would say today is just that. You owe it to yourself to try. To sit down and just be the essence of what you are as opposed to the expression of what you are. And then to bring that essence with you as you move through your day to every expression that you come into contact with is the essence of this mindfulness. And I'll cut myself off there, friends.
Yeah, I'd really love to hear more. Not this time, but maybe in the future, I would really love to get more advice on meaningful ways that you or Ev have been able to get into meditation, and how being busy people. I'm sure you're both busy just as much as I am. How you manage to fit that in as a parent, with 2 kids, and also being working full time, and I find it hard to get into a place of meditation at home. So maybe in the future, I would really love to get your guys' advice and how you've been able to work this into your lives so you can do that work.
Yeah, so, I'll give you what I do basically. I have the same issue because having children, your timetable is not set, right? So you don't have a lot of free time in order to sit down and practice, right? Actual sit down. So what I've done is I've decided that, throughout the day I have so much to do. I've got to work, I've got to take care of the kids, but there is some time throughout the day that I can actually do it. Just sit down and allocate time to it and dedicate it, because it's worth it. The time it's so important to actually do that. So it's actually worth my time to say, I'm not going to watch TV for this amount of time. I'm going to actually sit down and do this. So I've taken my practice out of K-Man's book, and I get up early. So now I get up at like 5:15, 5:30, where I can sit down for an hour before my kids get up, or my daughter gets up. And it's just a time just to sit and meditate. And it sucks. It sucks getting up early. But at some point, you owe it to yourself to be disciplined enough just to do that. You know what I mean? It's hard. But there is always time for you to sit down just for an hour. It doesn't even have to be an hour. You know what I mean? That's the time that I allocate, and it's great. But if you really, really want to, then just do it, Just wake up earlier and do it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about noise cancellation headphones.
I often just like noise like sound like every sense is always happening. There's not much you can do about it. I don't know how noisy your environment is, but noise is the same as your thoughts. It's just phenomenon arising within you. It's just an expression, right? So if you can allow the noise as much as you allow your thoughts to just happen while you're meditating, it's that's a great meditation practice as well. So don't worry too much about your life situation where it's happening. Just sit down. Yeah. And if the noise canceling headphones would help, then do that, but don't make it an excuse not to do it.
Yeah, I think it's conditioning for me. I had a background for a couple of years where I was dabbling in what some people call remote sensing or remote viewing, and silence was a huge part of that. It was a big key. I don't do it anymore, but I'm kind of a baby to this, to the meditation thing. And being busy dad, it's been difficult. So I really want to do it more. And I owe it to myself to do it. And I figure the more that I practice it, the easier it'll get to kind of just drone out the sound and just be a part of just what it is. So thanks for the advice. I just been curious, like what, some people out there, K-Man and you two, what you guys would do. So
yeah, and in terms of silence, external silence can definitely promote inner silence, but remember, it's the inner silence that you're after, quote unquote, right? So if you can get in touch with that inner silence, it doesn't matter what's happening on the outside. Yeah. And really delve into that and know what that is, which is basically what we've been talking about, sort of that space where all your expressions are occurring. If you can sit in that space of being, which is pure silence, then it doesn't matter what's happening in your environment. So I would endeavor, if I were you, to get in touch with that space, right? And see if that silence is enough to quote unquote overcome all the expressions that are happening, phenomena that are happening around you, right? Like you can feel it now, you can experience it right now, right? You're always here. Yeah. Being is always here.
I know you have to get going pretty soon here, D. So what I do is, I'd say, just as we're here, right? Sit down, close your eyes, right? We don't need 10 minutes, right? Let's try and get this done in 5 minutes for anyone out there that's just trying to start. So sit down, close your eyes. And now, whatever's arising, whatever is happening, whatever you're thinking, it's fine. Start with that. Whatever it is, say, fine, okay. Okay. Don't try to fight anything. Just say, okay. Yeah, okay. But don't run with it. Let it come to you. You're the one sitting down being still. So the thoughts can come to you, but you don't go towards any thoughts. So get fully immersed in being aware of your inner chatter. That's fine. I'm not trying to make anything quiet yet. Just trying to be on that level. So you're not even thinking about verbal stuff. You're more thinking about and aware of what's happening in there on that level. Let things come to you. You don't go with them. And then I want you now to just, as those things are happening, I want you to ask yourself how you feel about these things arising. And just be aware of how you feel about them arising. Not trying to stop them. Not trying to stop anything. Just bring your awareness to how you feel about these things. And don't put words to how you feel. Just feel how you feel. You don't need to tell yourself how you feel through articulation. You can just be and feel it. So just stay with how you feel. No words necessary. Focusing on feeling. And in this level of feeling now, what comes before this? What comes before your feelings? If it's a thought that makes you feel a certain way, then it's kind of an unnatural feeling. It's something you were coaxed into. What feelings arise that have nothing to do with any thoughts? How do you feel before any thoughts? How do you feel in the absence of any thoughts? Or you could say, how do you feel naturally? Naturally, you're at peace. Naturally, you are peace. Naturally. And this is always underneath everything. Even as we now open our eyes, naturally, you're peace. You're still peace. But now other things are going to come and arise and come over that. But at any moment, you can now choose to just remember what you are. And the more you do this, the easier it becomes to remember yourself. That without thinking, your natural state is peace. So remember, it's still there now while you're moving around. It's still there as we're going to get up and start talking now. And go about our day. It's still there. It's your awareness and remembrance of it is all that's required. And strengthening that helps you with your mindfulness as you go through your day. And I think that was about, 7 minutes it took?
Ooh, that's good.
So take 7 minutes out of your day, if all that's necessary. Right? That's all you need. All right. And I know you have to get going, buddy. So I just wanted to give you something to walk away with today. And yeah, thanks for joining us.
No, thank you,
our first
guys.
guest, Sunny D. Yeah.
Thanks, Ev. Thanks,
No
K-Man.
worries, buddy.
It was fun.
It was.
And we'll see you next time on Oneness Radio.
Peace out.
Peace.
Peace.